David Gabriel, thanks for coming in this morning.
Thank you for having me, Tim.
In your current position, how long?
I've been in my current position for 24 years.
And all of that, is that the bulk of your law enforcement, or was there something prior to that?
I started at a very early age at my current organization. It's a larger organization. Mm-hmm. We have about 250 employees. We do between 24,000 and 30,000 reports a year.
And your capacity, I say officer, that covers a lot of territory. What do you do now?
I'm actually a lieutenant, but my position is a watch commander.
Okay.
And that means basically I work from 8:45 at night to 7 o'clock in the morning. And during that time, you're pretty much responsible for everything in the county.
And how many people?
Total with everyone, you're probably talking 35, 40 people.
Okay, then that's relevant because that is basically the staff you'd be dealing with as sheriff in Oglethorpe County, as I understand it. About 40-some-odd folks down there. So that would be more or less a lateral position in terms of the number of people you deal with.
That's correct.
Your understanding, though, and this we'll get right to it now, as a candidate for sheriff, what do you want the sheriff to be and do? What do you expect the sheriff to be and do?
Well, in a place like Oglethorpe County, really and truly, the sheriff's department is a small business. And in a small business, everybody works. And the person who works the hardest is the owner. As a sheriff, you have to own that business of the sheriff's department there. And you have to work harder than anyone else. You have to be out there in public during the day and being seen. A big opportunity in Oglethorpe County is to start building relationships. I know a lot of people have issues about not seeing their law enforcement. And what you'll find is when you start building relationships with the community, it has a lot of dividends to it. They'll call and actually help you out with fighting crime. They're comfortable coming and telling you things and giving you tips and information they may not if they don't trust you as an organization or as a leader of that organization.
Now, one of the things that we will think of, if we didn't know anything else about Oglethorpe County, it's just some place we happen to know is there, maybe drive into and through from time to time, be tempted, I would think, to think, well, that's Mayberry. They don't have any problems there. Why do you need 40 people to deal with it? That's Mayberry down there. I understand it isn't. I mean, they have issues just like any other place does.
Well, people are going to be people no matter where they live. I know the population density in Oglethorpe County is much smaller than Athens. If you look at it, it's around 14,900 people, 441 square miles, compared to Athens is 120,000 people or so, plus students, and 122 square miles. So you're talking about a much less dense population. The issue with that is it creates other issues. You have to look at response time, the ability to get from place to place and cover a lot of different areas.
Well, I understand. In terms of geography, it's about the 39th, 40th largest county in the state.
Yes.
And with that relatively small number of people to cover it.
That's correct. Usually they'll have around 3 people working any given time, and you put 3 deputies over 441 square miles. That's a good little bit of stretch of land to take care of, and you certainly want to be responsible to the citizens and give them quality law enforcement. Even though they live in a rural area, they still deserve to have good law enforcement there and feel protected in their homes. David
Gabriel with us, candidate for sheriff in Oglethorpe County. You would, if you're fortunate enough to make it through this primary process, you would take on Democratic incumbent Mike Smith, I think 12 years down there as the sheriff and some time in that sheriff's office prior to that. You say you want to provide, and the people down there are entitled to, quality law enforcement. You would, I suppose, come the fall, try to make the case they're not exactly getting what they're entitled to.
Well, I'm not going to speak badly of anyone, but people know how they feel, and they have their opinions about the current administration. And I think when you're looking at running on change, which basically you are, you want to tell them what they're going to get for their money. And two of the biggest things I think they'll get is professionalism and customer service. You know, professionalism is just what do you look like when you get out of the car? Do you look like you can do the job? Do you have a certain amount of respect before you open your mouth? The other side of that's customer service, and that is, do you honestly, genuinely care that people are satisfied with the service you're giving them? Customer service is incredibly important because that's the basis for building relationships, and relationships are what's important for a community that size, because if you don't have a relationship with the community, you're not serving that community the way you should.
In terms of the race itself, the matter at hand, before you or one of these other gentlemen, Sid Stevens or Tommy Wheelis, face Mike Smith, there is at least the primary on May 24th, and with 3 candidates, at least the possibility of a runoff that would take place some weeks later. Where do you think you stack up? Do you feel comfortable at where you are right now in terms of the politics of this thing, the race itself?
The runoff will be July 26th, just in case it's needed. Hopefully it's not. But I feel good, but I think you should always remain humble. I think I'm hearing really good things and getting good feedback from people. I mean, part of being a good sheriff is you're a humble servant of the people. and you should always have that mindset and that mentality. You don't want to get cocky. You don't want to think you're better than what you are. You should always be a job of servitude. Unfortunately, most times people that get the job of sheriff are really good at self-promotion. And self-promotion and humility tend to be diametrically opposed. So, but my attitude is I'll stay humble, and I'll be grateful for any votes I get and appreciative of people, and I'm going to serve them in the best of my capacity.
Is this your first time running for anything?
It is.
Yeah. What do you think of the process so far?
Well, I mean, I think it's an important process. It's interesting when you're talking about Republican and Democrats for the sheriff, because really and truly the sheriff should be the most neutral person in the county. It should really.
By the way, you understand, and I know you know, the reason for that is why do we have parties for those people? Because it's a constitutional office.
Right.
It's chartered that way. Everybody just assumed it wasn't, but that's the way that is.
That's correct.
David Gabriel with us. Quick break. When we come back, some of the specifics, the crime issues that he would face in Oglethorpe County. What kind of crime you're trying to fight down there, and what do you do to mitigate some of it? Oglethorpe County Sheriff's Office. The incumbent is Mike Smith, Democrat, will be on the ballot in November against one of three men, three Republicans, Sid Stevens, Tommy Wheelis, and our guest in studio this morning, Athens Clark County Police Officer David Gabriel. Had occasion to be with you folks, a week or so ago, Candidates Forum down there in Crawford. By the way, wonderful event. The people who put that together, I think it was the Oglethorpe County Republican Party put that thing together. Wonderful event. Questions from the audience mostly, and mostly the audience, David Gabriel, when it came to specific crimes, a couple of things they were concerned about. Drugs and domestic situations. Sometimes those things can go hand in hand, obviously, but let's just take them, I suppose, in that order. Drugs, which come to mean different things. Some years ago, marijuana, maybe cocaine, suddenly methamphetamine, and increasingly heroin. In terms of the drugs that you see in Athens, your job here, and what you might expect to see there, are things changing fundamentally, or is it just a different drug with the same problem?
I think you see other problems with it. A lot of times when people are on marijuana, they don't break in your house and burglarize you, but you'll see that with people who are on heroin or specifically methamphetamine. And I'll throw a third one in there, is actually prescription drugs is becoming increasingly more popular. And you're seeing that recently. We had the armed robbery in Athens on Prince Avenue where they stole all the pain pills.
Sure.
And when you see people that are on these kind of things, there's crimes that go along with them because they have to pay for the drugs.
Sure.
I mean, drugs are not free, and they have to get the income somewhere, and a lot of them do not have jobs. From an organizational standpoint, you start off with addressing the flow of the drugs and the source of the drugs, but you also work on the other side and try to work on the people who actually take the drugs and the crimes associated with them. So you got to look at that two ways. There's a lot of resources from the government, locally and statewide, that you can use to fight those. And there's actually a lot of incentive to actually do drug enforcement. Part of it is when you do seizures, you take someone's house, you take someone's car, and you auction it off, that money goes directly to the sheriff's office. It does not go to the general fund. That's a separate account that you keep because they want to encourage you to do more drug seizures and try to stamp that out in your county. And I think that's one of the main things I've heard go around talking to people on the campaign trails. They're concerned about the drugs in Oglethorpe County, and I think they should be. And with drugs, you have to be aggressive, you have to be consistent, and you have to be relentless.
I don't know if there's any way to know this, but because you don't know what you don't know. If you did, you go fix it. But in terms of the number of meth operations in Oglethorpe County, people don't know that these meth labs, they're the 21st century version of the old moonshine stills now. I mean, that's what people are doing these days. How prevalent is that, or do we have any sense of how prevalent it might be in Oglethorpe County? I
think you really don't know until you really start looking. And part of the issue with methamphetamine production is it's gotten so simple now. It's gotten from used to have to be glass beakers and a kind of chemical setup, and you're going to now it's basically just a bottle that you can make it as a one bottle method that'll go anywhere. And so you look for the precursors and the things used and tracking down those drugs, and you start looking for these things, and that's how you find the methamphetamine productions. But I have no clue about how many there are in Oglethorpe County. But if I'm elected sheriff, I'm definitely going to see how many I can find.
Yeah. The other part of that, the other question that came up a lot during that forum a couple of weeks ago, domestic situations. One of those last night just down there in Oconee County, people may be hearing about this morning. A deputy shot and wounded a man there. We're understanding non-life-threatening injuries, and the deputy was not hurt at all. These things can escalate and get out of hands pretty quickly sometimes.
They can. If you have to understand domestic situations, domestic violence is a crime of control, where one party is trying to control the other party. A lot of times you have logic and emotion. domestic violence is based off emotion. It's not off of logic, because people wouldn't logically sit there and be abused by someone.
Sure.
They work them emotionally. And when you have emotional situations, your problem-solving abilities as a person tends to be very low. So a lot of times when somebody's upset, they can't see a simple way out. Most time for a person who's in an abusive relationship, the simple solution is to leave. But that's very difficult because you're emotionally invested in that relationship. And what you'll find is the lethality of the relationship tends to go up as the person begins to leave, because the person who wants to control the other person feels like they're losing control, so they're going to actually increase their violence that they use as the person begins to leave. And it takes oftentimes between 10 and 11 times for a person to be able to leave an abusive relationship successfully. And you tend to see if there's serious violence, it tends to be during that time.
Yeah, and law enforcement, I mean, that speaks to a lot of problems that law enforcement just isn't equipped to solve. I mean, you're there to, I'll be blunt about it, you're there to clean up the mess and arrest the wrongdoer.
As an organization, what you have to do is not just look at the situation you have before you. You have to look at the history of it. And you go back and see how many times you've been to that house. You talk to the person individually, find out what's going on with them. There are other resources out there that you can get specifically for women especially to help them get out of these situations, because in the end, the whole reason that the domestic violence law was passed is so that we can help people get out of bad relationships before they turn lethal. And that is the whole point of the law, is to reduce fatalities and serious injuries from these type of relationships. And it allows us to go in and really make arrests and put a stopgap in to make this stop, and actually help the courts get involved in things and put certain restrictions on them to help them be successful in starting a new relationship or leaving that one.
You know, it's a great distinction you made that had never occurred to me. That's why you're the professional in law enforcement and I'm not. Again, David Gabriel, candidate for Oglethorpe County Sheriff. The distinction between crimes of emotion and, if you will, crimes of logic. Nobody ever emotionally robbed a convenience store. It's wrong. There's a logic to it. I'm robbing the store because I need the money, so I want to buy a drug. Okay, there's a logic. We can follow that. This domestic stuff is almost entirely emotion.
That's correct. And what you'll find is when emotion is high, logic is very low. Many times I taught a class in Oglethorpe County and civics class from Mr. Anderson, and I talked to the kids, and I called it a little bit of premarital advice. And I said, basically, men tend to be more logic-based and women are more emotional-based. Women tend to be better communicators. So men aren't trying to be detached. They're trying to be logical and problem solve. Women aren't trying to be unreasonable. They're trying to be, a good communicator and communicate how they're feeling emotionally. And sometimes as men and women, they have a hard time communicating between the two. Same thing if you look, when you're talking about certain situations, when a man is trying to problem solve, he seems very unemotional. That causes issues. Sure. But he's trying to solve the problem. So emotion is low, logic's high. When the woman's trying to communicate her side of things, she may be very emotional, and to the guy it might seem like she's being, not very logical, but she's trying to communicate. And that transfers over when you're talking about different things, and you have to understand that going into a situation that you're dealing with emotional people. And what you bring to the party as law enforcement is you should bring logic, because emotion's already there. And when, as a law enforcement officer, if you bring emotion to a situation, bad things happen.
Sure. Again, David Gabriel with us. One of the other things that came up, and I don't remember now the specifics, even if there were any, there was a proposal for some local ordinance, one of the municipalities there, Lexington, Crawford, one of the municipalities there. What if the municipality does this, that, or the other thing? And again, I don't remember the specific. Maybe you will. But you made an interesting point that hadn't occurred to me on that front. Listen, you can pass all the local stuff you want to. It's up to the county, the county law enforcement entity, in this case, the Oglethorpe County Sheriff's Office, to go out there and enforce it, and that can sometimes impose difficulties on the sheriff's office.
What you have to look at, and you're responsible for taking care of the entire county in Oglethorpe. There are no municipal police forces. So what you have to do is hopefully you're in on that planning session, and when they're talking about passing those ordinances, you can help give guidance about how it should be written or how it can be enforced. Because the last thing you want to do is write an ordinance that's unenforceable, because there's nothing really you can do with that. So what you do is, if a municipality passes a ordinance, then you're going to be responsible for enforcing it. Then you need a memorandum of understanding from that municipality saying, we understand this is the way it's going to work. Another option for them is to actually have their own enforcement officers, and they pay them on their own. They return them to a court of their choosing. And so when you set these things up, you have to kind of script it out to make them understand how the flow goes and what court it goes to and who's going to do the enforcing. Otherwise, it's kind of counterproductive.
Circle back to where you started here. A couple of minutes left. David Gabriel running for sheriff in Oglethorpe County. You talked about going in as sheriff if you're elected and working to better establish relationships within some of these communities. And you made the point where you and I were talking during the break. That's the stuff you didn't see in Ferguson or Baltimore or some of these other places. You get the sense of looking at it from the outside. And the cop showed up. It's the first time anybody ever seen a cop.
Right. What it is you start off part of it, in Clark County we have the school resource officers, and you start building those relationships then, even with the children, where there's a level of trust. And when you see all these places where they're having strife with the police services, between the community and the police, they're missing that relationship. You have to keep that small town mentality. Even in Clark County, you still keep those relationships open. You go out to these different community members, and most time when people get upset, they get upset over bad information or wrong information, and they need to be able to trust you enough that you come in and bring the correct information. And you have to have transparency as a police agency or a sheriff's department to make sure that when something happens, if you did wrong, say you did wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. People understand that. It's when you start trying to hide things and stuff like that you start having issues with the community. If you always do things correctly and you have good transparency and good communication, you're going to have a great relationship with the community, and they'll support you in what you do. And that's what you have to have.
Again, running for sheriff, a lot of ground to cover there. In addition to the full-time job you have in Athens, running for sheriff in Oklahoma, that's a job in itself out there campaigning.
It is. I usually, on my days off, I'll spend between 12 and 14 hours a day to go around and see people. I try to have good quality visits. My average visits between 15 and 30 minutes with a person. So I only see maybe 10, 12 people a day. But when I leave there, I want them to know who I am. I want them to have a good understanding of what kind of sheriff I would be. And my hopes are that they would go out and speak for me and become someone who goes out and campaigns for me and talks to their friends. You can go out and talk to somebody 2 minutes and do a handshake, a quick line, and put a sign in the yard, but what do they really know about you? My thing is the relationship building process starts now, and I'm building relationships along the way. So when I get in the office, I'll already have a group of people that know me well enough to trust me and feel free to call me.
Well, again, best of luck. The primary, May 24th, a little more than a month away. Early voting now less than 2 weeks away. Starts on the 2nd of May. David Gabriel. Again, David Gabriel, Sid Stevens, Tommy Wheelis, Republican candidates for sheriff in Oglethorpe County. David Gabriel, thanks for coming in this morning. Good luck in the election.
Thank you for having me.